Good evening. Welcome to the local author chat. We've got some wonderful best-selling authors lined up this evening, and I'm sure it'll be very informative and entertaining for you all. My name is Jennifer Patrick, and I am an Oakville Public Library staff member, and I'll be helping to moderate the event tonight, along with one of the authors, Hannah Mary McKinnon, who will be leading the discussion tonight. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. So tonight's session will be recorded and uploaded to the library's YouTube channel. So anybody wants to take a look at it again or wasn't able to make it, it'll be up there. Keeping that in mind, we're asking that all attendees to keep their cameras off for privacy. As well, you'll also be muted during the session. However, we do encourage interaction and questions. So if you have any, please put them in the chat box and the authors will be happy to answer them. I'd first like to start off with the land acknowledgement. Oakville Public Library is located on Treaty 22 land and acknowledges that Oakville is home to many different Indigenous, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We give thanks to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for their stewardship of the land, and we recognize the responsibility we all have in protecting the land, water, air, animals, and plants that our library branches are located on. And so next I would like to introduce Ian Elliott from A Different Drummer Books, who will say a few words before we begin, and I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm just going to hold up the program briefly here with the commercial, and thank you very much, Jennifer. I'm over here at A Different Drummer Books in Burlington. I just wanted to express my admiration and gratitude for the authors tonight, and my admiration for their great works as well. Writing and storytelling caliber we're going to encounter in tonight's session is the reason the bookstore exists. In our humble way, we get to be the place of connection between writer and reader, just like our friends over at Oakville Public Library. We're fortunate that we get to introduce you to these esteemed authors. They're rightly praised internationally as well. And we also get to make their books available to you as well. And these authors are all part of our local community. Praise be, what a great place we all live in here. So if you don't have your copies yet of the scintillating Recipe for a Perfect Wife by the extraordinary Karma Brown, the riveting Little Secrets by the, oh, these are backwards. I hope, well, anyhow. Oh, they're not backwards.
No, they're good.
Okay, right. By the sensational Jennifer Hilliar, the captivating The Jane Austen Society by the brilliant Natalie Jenner, and the mesmerizing, oh, where is it? There it is. Sister Dear by the formidable Hannah Mary McKinnon. We are here to help you put that right. So do treat yourself and those close to you to some splendid reading and some great storytelling. And a measure of the author's generosity and thoughtfulness, they have all kindly sent us signed book plates. And we will install these in every copy you buy. I made that collage myself. So the books will be provided to you in a safe, contact-free way, either curbside here at the shop, or we'll bring them to your home. No extra charge for doing so. So please give us a call or an email, and we'll get it all arranged. This is kind of the used car commercial part, but that's our phone and our email there. I'll just hold that for a sec. I can also put it in the chat if folks would like me to. And much as I wish we were all together tonight over at Oakville Public Library or here at A Different Drummer Books, I'm glad we're all connected in this way and that we're keeping safe tonight. And I know we're all eager to spend some time with Hannah, Karma, Jennifer, and Natalie, and how lucky and honored we are to have the chance to do so. So let's meet up with them now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ian and Jennifer, very much. And welcome, everyone. We are absolutely thrilled to be here tonight. There's a snowstorm going on outside, but nobody has to travel, so it's all good. We will start off, I'll introduce each of the authors, and then we're just going to have a chat basically about lots of different things. And as Jennifer mentioned, please do add questions and comments in the Q&A, and we will keep up with those as best we can and answer whatever questions you might have. So let me start with the introductions. Let me see if I need my glasses for this. Probably, yeah, I need my glasses. I need my cheap Joe Fresh readers for this. Okay, so I have the authors in alphabetical order because it's just easy that way. So, Karma Brown is the best-selling author of 5 novels. The #1 bestseller, Recipe for a Perfect Wife, Come Away With Me, brackets, which almost broke me, a Globe and Mail Best Book of 2015, Globe and Mail and Toronto Star bestsellers, The Choices We Make and In This Moment, and The Life Lucy Knew. She's also the author of The 4% Fix, which just landed on the Canadian bestseller list, How 1 Hour Can Change Your Life. And I'm sure we'll get to this later, but Karma gets up very early in the morning, so if anyone knows how to get a lot out of 1 hour, Karma's your girl. A National Magazine award-winning journalist, Karma has been published in Chatelaine, Canadian Living, Self, Red Book, and Today's Parent, among others. She lives just outside Toronto, brackets Oakville, because we all do, with her husband and daughter and Labradoodle named Fred. Hello, Karma.
Hello, Hannah. Thank you.
Sorry, Hannah, to interrupt. Your microphone's sort of breaking up a little bit.
Uh-oh, that's not good. Let me see if I can do something.
Do you have headphones, Hannah?
I do. I can try headphones. Hold on. I'll look like Mickey Mouse, but let's see if that works. Hold on.
Or I could try muting all of the authors and unmute you. You can try that.
Hold on. Excuse me while I show you the top of my head.
Already sounded better.
Let's see.
Look like I'm about to fly a plane. Any better?
Yes.
Better.
Yeah.
Yeah? So it was me, was it? Uh-oh. Okay. Still choppy?
No, it's better.
Good.
Okay. All right. I shall continue with Jennifer Hillier. There's a story between Jenny and me. Maybe we'll get to it later. Jennifer Hillier imagines the worst about people and then writes books about it. She's the author of 6 psychological thrillers, including Jar of Hearts, which won the 2019 Thriller Award for Best Hardcover Novel and scared the bejesus out of Hannah Mary McKinnon and was shortlisted for the Anthony and McCavity Awards. Her newest thriller, Little Secrets, which just went into its 4th printing, is available now from Minotaur Books. Born in Toronto, she spent 8 years in the Seattle area, which is where all her books are set. She currently serves as the VP Awards for International Thriller Writers and is a member of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime. Her novels are published in more than a dozen languages, and she says, although I'm not sure I believe it, she's painfully behind on her 7th novel. Hello, Jennifer. And Natalie Jenner, who is the internationally best-selling author of the Jane Austen Society, a smash hit all around the world. A fictional telling of the start of the society in the 1940s in the village of Chawton, where Austen lived. Born in England, yay, like me, and raised in Canada, Natalie is a former lawyer who also once founded Archetype Books, an independent bookstore in Oakville, where she lives with her family and 2 rescue dogs. A #1 national USA Today and LA Times bestseller, the Jane Austen Society will be translated into, drumroll, 18, that's 18, different languages around the world. Hello, Natalie.
Hi, Hannah.
She's also an extraordinary cook, brackets. And then there's me, Hannah Mary McKinnon. I'm actually reading this, which is really weird. I'm reading my own bio, but I'm going to do it anyway. Was born in the UK, grew up in Switzerland and moved to Canada in 2010. After a successful career in recruitment, I quit the corporate world in favour of writing. And while my debut, Time After Time, was a light and fluffy rom-com, I transitioned to the dark side thereafter. Thank you, Jennifer. My suspense novels include The Neighbours and Canadian bestsellers Her Secret Son and Sister Dear. And my next one, You Will Remember Me, publishes in May. I also live in Oakville with a husband and 3 teenage sons, and I can't keep up with feeding them. So that's me. And as we are all living in Oakville, but not sure where everybody is based, who's tuned in, I'm going to introduce Oakville. So this is the town. It's not really a town anymore, is it? But this is the town we live in. Nestled on the shores of Lake Ontario, Toronto to one side and Hamilton to the other, the beautiful town of Oakville is known for its picturesque harbours, vibrant shopping districts, brackets, not when there's COVID, active arts community, obviously, and some of the best dining options in the Greater Toronto area. Oakville was founded in 1857 by Colonel William Chisholm, who purchased the land at the mouths of the 16-mile and 12-mile, now known as Bronte, creeks from the Mississauga people and left development of the lands to his son, Robert Kerr Chisholm, and brother-in-law, Thomas Merrick. Blessed by 2 natural harbours and shores dense with trees, shipbuilding and timber, shipbuilding and timber became important early industries. Oakville is now home to over 200,000 people and will welcome approximately 1.4 million visitors this year. I'm not sure when that was, but probably they didn't mean 2021. In 2012, Toronto Life magazine ranked Oakville as one of the 5 must-visit destinations in the Greater Toronto area. And it is indeed a lovely place to be. So welcome, everyone. Why don't we start off with, because we just talked about Oakville, how we ended up here. Which one of you would like to kick that question off? How did you end up in Oakville?
I can go first. Natalie, do you want to go first?
I'll go first because I think I might have ended up here at the earliest because I was just about to start school. And my parents had emigrated from England, where my brother and I were born. And we moved here sort of like the early to mid 70s. And I lived in one part of town and then another, and then went off to U of T, but grew up here essentially for all my schooling. And that's how I ended up in Oakville. Oakville has a huge British expatriate community that it's known for. And my parents were part of the first wave of that. And Hannah, you kind of came along as well.
I did. Karma, how about you? How did you end up here?
I ended up here. I'm trying to even think of how long ago it was. I think it was probably 9 years ago now, but we were in Toronto. I grew up on a farm and I only wanted to live in a big city for the rest of my life. And so went to Toronto as soon as I could, loved being in Toronto. Then we had a child and it was very complicated being in a small spot in Hyde Park with a kid. And so we decided we wanted a little more room for her to run because she used to take off down Bloor Street and we'd have to chase her. You know, we had some scary times on Bloor Street with her, but so we came out here to the burbs. So now instead of walking Bloor Street, I walk the lovely forest behind our house.
Yeah. Nice. Very nice. And you've been here 9 years, you said?
I don't know. I think it's around
Somewhere
9 years.
there.
I've truly lost count of many things at this point, but I think it's around 9. Yeah.
And you, Jennifer?
You can call me Jenny. It's cool. I moved here. We moved around so much when I was in high school. So I went to 5 different high schools. And I ended up going to OT, Oakville Trafalgar, back when it was the old building, when I was 16. So that was grade 11. And then we moved away. And then my mom and I came back. And I ended up graduating at Loyola. And then I got married. And we lived in Oakville. And then we moved to Seattle. And I got divorced. And then I came back and lived in Oakville. Then I got remarried and moved back to Seattle, different guy, and then ended up back in Oakville. So I feel like Oakville seems to be the place where I come to regroup. And so when we were, when it was time to move to Canada and I wanted to bring my American husband and my son, it felt like a no-brainer to come back to Oakville, which is such a nice place to live. So.
It is a nice place to live. I agree. We arrived here 10 years ago. It's been a decade. living in Switzerland, husband from New Brunswick, and we decided to move to Canada. And he came over with a brief. He came over for a week with a brief, find a house between Ancaster and Oakville-ish, because I was going to work in Toronto. And of course, it's no problem if you live in Ancaster driving into Toronto every day, right? That's no problem at all. Right.
No problem.
No problem. Easy peasy. For those who don't know, that would be a nightmare of a commute every day. And so he came and found a house, and it happened to be Oakville, and we've been here ever since. So here we are. Great place to be, and so many authors as well, because we're not the only ones. There are many more, but
there's a few of us, right? Like outside of this.
Yeah, something in the water. I think that's what it is. Yeah, something in the water. So were you always an author, or did you have a secret squirrel, spy, crime fighting life or something beforehand? What did you do before you became an author? Was it something you always wanted to do, or was it something you stumbled into? Jenny, let's kick off.
I always wanted to be a writer. I worked at Sheridan College for a couple of years back in, I'm going to date myself, back in the mid 90s. And I used to jot stories down in between signing students up for night school, like continuing education is what they called it. So, and then I moved, and then I worked at the University of Waterloo. So all of my like regular job stuff was in post-secondary, which is probably why my first book takes place on a university campus, because it was fun to imagine murdering people in school.
I shouldn't be laughing.
Should we ask why?
That was funny. Yeah.
There's something about like working for a school when the kids are adults but not yet on their own, because they're full of such optimism. And I used to love being around that kind of energy, because it's before you find out that life might not work out the way that you wanted it to, but you're still energetic and you're going for it. And I love being around that. But then at the same time, I was sort of like, what if someone died on campus? What would they do? What if someone got thrown into the woods behind, the registrar's office? What would they do? And so that's kind of where my stories came from. But yeah, I've always been a writer, I think. And I suspect most of us are.
Natalie?
Yeah, I mean, I took 50 years to get there, but I wanted to be a writer. My mother said from before I could read, from about the time I was 2 or 3, I would just walk around the house going, like jotting little nonsensities down. But I also want to be a lawyer, and that's a pretty protracted, educational path. So I spent my 20s building up a career as a corporate M&A securities lawyer in a tech boom at King and Bay. And I segued from that in my 3rd year of practice into providing coaching and consulting services, similar to Hannah. We both have that HR consulting background. And I did that for over 20 years and got my book deal, I think, when I was 50. And I think the book came out a month after I turned 52. So it's not my first rodeo. I mean, I've written a bunch in a drawer, but it was the first one that anybody got back to me on. So that was nice.
I love that story, though. I love that story.
I read a tweet. Well, occasionally you see tweets where people say, "Oh, I'm 28. I haven't had a book published yet. Is it too late for me?" And they, good grief, I was in my 40s. Come on now.
Yeah.
Sit down, child. You have plenty of time. But I understand the frustration, because you don't know if it's going to happen and how long it'll take. So I get that. How about you, Karma? Always writing?
So never wanted to be a writer. That's the funniest thing. I did write a book about some ice skating elephants when I was a child, and 2 mice who were best friends and then had a falling out and then made it back together. And I was a voracious reader, but I never wanted to be a writer. And in fact, when I went to journalism school, people assumed that I wanted to go into newspapers or magazines. And I would say, no, I wanted to be the Katie Couric of the North. So I wanted to be a broadcast anchor, and that's what I was planning to do. And, it's a long, convoluted story about how I ended up writing. But in journalism school, I did, because I was learning magazine work as well, I went and then started freelancing for magazines and loved that. And then just thought one day, well, maybe I should try to write a novel. I mean, it can't be that different from writing like, you know, a feature for a magazine. Well, it's very different, and I didn't have any idea what I was doing, but I found that I loved writing fiction so much. And I just then, and I have books in the drawer too. I had 2 books that I wrote that never were published. They were my practice books before my debut. And I also published my debut in my 40s. So, you know, I think this is like the second half of my life career that I never actually, I mean, I'm not joking, never considered being a writer. So I know people always assume that authors always wanted to be authors, but I didn't think it was a career until it was a career. So I feel pretty lucky to have figured that out now. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the the fiction and non-fiction, because we have a question here from Joanna. And it's a nice segue into my next question. How did you find, Karma, writing a non-fiction book, because you have the 4% fix that just came out, from your usual fiction? She says, by the way, I loved Recipe for a Perfect Wife, and I absolutely loved it. I have lent it to so many people, and they have also loved it. So lots of fan mail there. So was it very different writing the 4% fix?
Yes. It was very different. And in fact, you know, you did mention that I get up early to write, which is true, like around 5 a.m. is my writing time. And I tried to get up to write this nonfiction book at the same time, because of course, this is when I'm creative, and it refused to be written at 5 a.m. So it's a book about getting up at 5 a.m. to do something you've always wanted to do that would not be written at 5 a.m. So I wrote that one during the day. You know, it was really different. It was very similar.
Oh, we've lost your sound.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now, yeah.
You can hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
No? You can hear me. Okay. I probably moved around too much. My hair, just sometimes there are technical problems. Yeah, it was a lot like writing a magazine feature, but, you know, 70 times, all on the same theme. So it was a different challenge. And I did get a little sick of my own voice, I will say, because, you know, there's a lot of anecdotes from my life in there and my own experiences, but it was interesting. It was just very different. But yeah, it was good.
We've lost you again.
I approached it.
Oh, there you are again.
I'm taking these out. Hang on. I'm taking them out. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to go straight with my mic here.
Yeah, that's better actually. Yeah, that's better.
So anyway, yes, so that's my answer. But you didn't tell us, Hannah, about how you came to write.
Oh, how I came to write through failure, because I started up a company when we arrived here, and it was never on my radar either. Writing was never on my agenda. I thought maybe one day, maybe at some point I might write a book, kind of in the back of my head. But it wasn't until I was forced to make a decision: do I keep doing the corporate gig, much like you, Natalie, or do I try something else? And it was actually my husband Rob who said, just try something else, just give it a go. Who knows what will happen? Maybe nothing will happen, maybe something will happen, but if you don't try, you'll never know. And I'm glad I listened. Yeah, so that's how. Yeah, lucky. So, Karma, we touched a bit on the 4% fix. Natalie, tell us a bit about the Jane Austen Society. Tell us about what's it about? Tell us.
It's a completely fictional retelling of the fact that Jane Austen lived in a town for 10 years and worked on all 6 of her major books. And that house was eventually turned into a museum, but for a while it just sat being ignored. And I took that one historical fact and then created 8 very different villagers, 5 of whom are on the cover of the book, and just basically I'm telling a story about how these 8 people bond over their love of books, their love of Jane Austen, and they're all coming out of trauma and grief at the tail end of World War II. And the love of Jane Austen and the project of trying to save her house is going to connect them all and help them through this difficult time. So that's what it's about.
And why Jane Austen?
Jane Austen has been my favorite writer since I was very little, like 9 or 10. But what happened to me was I had this bookshop in downtown Oakville, and I had to close it on its 1-year anniversary. My husband was given a very serious and ongoing medical challenge. And I always turn to Jane Austen for comfort. So in a way, my book mirrors the very thing that I was doing at the time. And I spent a year reading her, aggressively rereading Jane Austen, and then reading everything I could find about her. And then I took a trip to England on my own to walk in her footsteps, having no idea during this time that I was doing unintentional research for what would be my first published book, because I had written 5 earlier manuscripts, like I said, but then I took a 10-year break. I thought that was behind me. I thought the bookshop was going to be my way to keep books a bigger part of my life. And the bookshop actually led to the book. And
were the 5 you wrote previously also centered around Jane Austen, or were they different?
No, they're very different. I mean,
really?
I think that's the one the thing that I think all of our books are all very different from each other in a way, and I think that's what's very fascinating. And you can say we're genre writers, some of us, but everything I wrote is completely different from the next beast. So this was just, I think Jane Austen was the hook. I mean, when people say, what was the difference this time? I would say it was the fact that before I had agents say, this is beautiful writing, but, you're a nobody, like, what's your hook? Like, how is this book going to stick out from anyone else's? And Jane Austen was, the hook. And that was the commercial difference for my type of writing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jane.
Very much. Yes, very much.
And Jenny, your thrillers are amazing and are what drew me to the dark side. You know this, but tell us about Little Secrets and the Santa sweater, or the reindeer sweater, I should say, which just about killed me, I think, when I was reading it.
So you know how we always get that question, like, where you get your book ideas, and it's like the hardest question to answer because I don't know that we know, or if we do, we don't want to say. So Little Secrets, like all of my books, is basically a trauma from my life mixed with a fear that I have. It turned into entertainment for other people. And so Little Secrets is about a woman who loses her 4-year-old child at the farmer's market. And as a mom, and my kid was 4 at the time that I wrote it, that was my biggest fear, because he is so squirmy and chatty with strangers. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to turn around and he's going to be gone. And then what? And then I imagined that most people would bring the kid back if he'd wandered away, because I think that happens most of the time. But then what if you left the farmer's market and you never found him again? And then what would happen, right? So that was basically what I wanted to explore. And I have deluded myself into believing that if I write about the scariest thing, then it can't possibly happen. One, which doesn't really work, but that's what I tell myself. And then the other thing that I tell myself is that, well, if it does happen, I have written all about it, so then I'll know what to do, right? So it's like this double positive thing. But in reality, it's very traumatic to write about stuff that scares you. But there's something about like a feeling of control that when you lay it out on the page, it's less scary, I find. But I mean, all of my books involve some type of fear and trauma.
I think that's what in Little Secrets gave it so much tension and authenticity, because you were imagining that this is you and this is your child, and suddenly they're gone, and it was. It was. I think as I was reading it, I was texting you, saying, "OMG, what's going on?"
Maybe not phrasing it as "What would you do here?" but we had a lot of conversations about being a mom, and there were things I didn't know if they were authentic to every parent. So I was kind of testing you out without you knowing it. Like, would you do this if you didn't know where one of your kids was? And you were like, "Oh, I totally do that." So I kept it real. I didn't want to shy away from how dark a place as moms, and we're all moms, right? How dark we would go if we blamed ourselves for losing our kids. And then there's no closure because they're not dead, they're missing. And so you're kind of in a suspended state.
I think that's brave. I've written kids into my books, but they have never been the ages that my kids are. They've either been younger or older. Rarely do I make stuff happen to a character that would be the age of one of my children. So yeah, hats off to you for that one. Karma, let me come back to you with your last work of fiction, Recipe for a Perfect Wife, which Ian showed earlier. It's one of these books that I remember putting down and thinking, dang it, I wish I'd written that. So tell us about Recipe.
Okay, so can I say one thing about the writing your fears? I think that's so interesting what Jen said, because my debut, Come Away With Me, which is a very sad book, and I don't write sad books anymore because I wrote 4 sad books and then I just couldn't do it, because you do live in those pages. But that book has like my greatest fear in it too. And I think that, you know, you do have that, am I controlling this or am I working through it while I'm writing it? But that's just, you know, that's the debut. And I still get messages all the time about people like, there should be a warning, don't read this when you're around other people. So if you haven't read Come Away With Me and you want to cry, although who wants to cry right now in 2020, 2021, but just don't read it in front of other people.
But they're still uplifting. You make them sound as if they're really, really sad and there's no hope in them. That's not true.
No, they have satisfying endings, but
yes,
they tackle very emotional topics and really hard life stuff. So
make sure you got a box of these lying around.
Yeah. But Recipe for a Perfect Wife, you don't cry. This book, you know, I have all these old vintage cookbooks that have been passed down to me from my grandmother and my mom loved to cook. And so she always wrote notes in her margins of her cookbooks. And I inherited some of those cookbooks and also grew up with this habit of, you know, a woman's voice is really captured through the pages of the cookbook. And especially in the 40s and 50s, where women didn't have a voice the way that in many parts of the world we do now, although not everywhere. And so I was always so interested to see what people were writing about what was happening in their day-to-day life, because I have cookbooks that are not my family ones as well. And I just had this very clear picture of the woman who owned this 1950s cookbook, was given it as a shower gift when she was getting married, and just sitting in her garden thinking about what she was going to make her husband for dinner, flipping through this cookbook and smoking her cigarette and looking at her beautiful garden. And this picture of who she was in, you know, 1955, and then thinking, well, is that really who she is? And what's actually happening under the surface for this woman who maybe has all these different aspirations and dreams outside of making her husband like this meatloaf for dinner. And it just started from there. And then I wanted to contrast it to 2018, which is the year that when I was writing it, that was the year that I was doing my edits in, and looking at, well, has life really changed for women? How far have we come? How are things still, unfortunately, more like they were in the 50s than they are now? And so it was comparing those two eras and those women, and they're linked through a house and through this cookbook and through some dark secrets. So it was fun because I got to put a tiny bit of darkness in there without going overboard. Like,
and historical too. I mean, it's a mix of contemporary and historical, and perhaps a shade darker than your previous books. It was fascinating, and now you have a non-fiction one as well. So kind of all kinds of different.
And then another fiction. I just finished another fiction too. That's again a dual narrative, and there's a historical element, but it's the 70s this time. So
yes,
it's been fun. It's been fun experimenting with the different.
And quick poll with Natalie and Jenny: do you write in your cookbooks? Do you make notes in your cookbooks? Do you have cookbooks?
I don't have a cookbook. I have an app.
It's the modern today. Yeah.
It's 2021.
The app is so easy, right? Like you have the recipe in there, and then if you are out of ingredients, you tap on them and it puts them in a grocery list.
So, come on, that is
my
clever.
husband and I share the app, so then we can like each anyway.
That's smart and efficient.
I now wish I had a cookbook that I could write in, because then that would be something I could hand down.
Exactly. You can start now. It's
true.
Yeah.
Natalie, do you write in them?
No, I just take screenshots of things and then I merge recipes together to create like best practices, and then I lose it, and then it's in the netherworld, and everyone's like, "Can't you make that again?" My husband's the same way, so it's almost the magic of, can I do it again? It's just trying to inject some adventure right now into like kitchen duties.
Well, I blame you, Karma, because I've started writing in cookbooks that I never did before. And I thought, why don't I write in cookbooks? It makes perfect sense to write in them if you put in more or less of something or add something, whatever, or a little comments.
What you're doing, like what the event was. My mom will say like Karma's 18th birthday. And then I just always have this memory of that meal on my birthday. It's just like, it's kind of a special thing to have as a family to pass down. So I'm happy that you've started doing that.
That's nice.
Yeah. I have. So I guess we can't really get away from the fact that we're not meeting in person, although being online, we can reach so many more people in different geographic locations. And also the snowstorm is a non-event for us to get anywhere. But we can't ignore the fact that there is still a pandemic going on, and has been going on now for a decade now? I don't know, feels like it. Has that, or how has that, or hasn't it influenced your writing? And I have a follow-up question for this one, actually. Is it impacting what you're writing now? Are you including the pandemic in what you're writing, what you're working on now? Are you thinking about it? Are you just setting everything pre-2020 or 2022? Natalie, let's kick off with you.
You should go first, Hannah. You didn't even tell us.
I'm focusing on you. It's
no,
it's all good.
No, I think we need to hear about Sister Dear, and I think we need to answer the question that we've all been asked.
What was the question again?
Just what your question? Tell us how that book came to be.
All right. Okay.
Not talking about it.
No. All right. I'll give you a quick overview of Sister Dear. So Sister Dear is my fourth novel. Came out last May, and it's not my darkest. I always say that my next one's the darkest, and the one I'm writing now is probably darker than the one that is coming out this year. But anyway, Sister Dear is a story of half sisters who don't know that the other exists. And one of them finds out that she has a very glamorous, wealthy, sexy, successful, happily married half sister who is and has everything that she could only ever dream of. And she gets jealous because, that's the story. And she decides to infiltrate her half sister's life, but she doesn't tell her they're related. And mayhem ensues because that's the kind of story it is. So it's very dark. It was a lot of fun to write, and I am firmly in the suspense psychological thriller genre now. I don't know if I'll ever write a rom-com again because I'm having too much fun messing with fictional people, which I don't do in real life, I can assure you. So that's Sister Dear.
Hannah, to go to the pandemic question that you're going to ask us, for you wrote your next book. Was it last spring? I'm trying to remember what months were you writing the book that's going to come out this May?
I handed it in January, so a year ago. So the one that's coming out this May, you will remember me. I handed it in January, and then I edited it after the pandemic had hit, because I was plotting the one I'm just finishing now for next year. So I was in edit mode, which helped, actually, I have to say. Because at the beginning, I'm going to answer my own question now, which is weird. When the pandemic, yeah, clever, well done. That's the coaching coming in. When the pandemic hit, I panicked a lot. This was when there were about 150,000 cases, which sounds so paltry and ridiculous now. I really panicked, and I have family in Europe. I saw what was going on there, and I was very, very worried. And I just freaked out a lot for about 2 weeks straight until Rob, the voice of reason again, my husband, said, just stop watching the news, brackets maybe not completely, but so obsessively. And so I did. I just I'd allow myself maybe half an hour of reading and watching the news, and that was it. I went and worked on a laptop, an old laptop with a rubbish Wi-Fi connection, so I couldn't actually get onto the internet even if I wanted to, and I left my phone somewhere else. And it was amazing how productive I was. And I still do that, actually, depending on what I'm working on. But so in that sense, it did have an impact on my writing initially. And then I decided that the only thing that was really within my control was our family of 5. And that was, I couldn't influence anything else. I could just make sure that we were following the guidelines and the rules and keeping up to date on what we were supposed to be doing. And everything else, I just had to, for my own sanity, put a bit of a barrier up so I could continue working. So I was okay after a couple of weeks. Back to you.
So writing, I think it's such an insular, solitary activity, especially that first draft. So for me, I've written 2 books since the pandemic started, or at least edited, one and then started from scratch one in July. And I didn't find the pandemic affected the act of the creative writing. And I feel very, very lucky because I know that creativity requires a certain degree of freedom. And I think when there's so much bad news constantly coming at you and you don't know what the next day is going to look like, you don't feel free, and your brain, like Jennifer was saying, like writing, often for me too, is a way to somehow maybe work through or feel in control or set things in motion that you're scared by. And then this real life thing is happening. And writing for me is this escape. So I don't plot or outline. I make everything up. I just don't know what's going to happen. So I go into the zone, and I was able to keep doing that throughout the pandemic. I think how the pandemic has affected me is I have never seen my book in a store. I haven't left my house since March 13th. So I have not really processed that I'm a published writer. And I think in a weird way that helped me do the next book and sell the next book. Jennifer and I bizarrely share an editor in New York, which is such a small world. And Jennifer and Hannah both have been tremendous mentors to me in this process. But there is this sophomore pressure, if your first book, no matter what age you are, does well, to follow it up. And I think there was no chatter for me. There was, these wonderful Zoom events, and how I feel so lucky that we have this ability to still connect with readers and possibly connect with more of them as a result, as a debut author who doesn't have a platform. But I did find that the idea that I had a book in shops and on a bestseller list was very disjointed for me and like a separate Natalie life. And I think that enabled me to keep being creative. I consider it a blessing in disguise.
Mm-hmm. It is such a treat to be able to walk into a shop and see your book on the shelves. It's exciting and bizarre at the same time. I found it was very strange. Karma, with the pandemic, you've been so prolific in this past 12 months. It doesn't seem like it's really affected you that much, or am I misreading that?
I think, I had a lot of deadlines. I wrote 2 books and edited 2 books during the pandemic. But
that's what we can call prolific. I think we can get away with prolific with that.
Yeah, but you know what? I have my 5 a.m. writing habit, and I stuck with it. And it's just a habit for me. I've been doing it for 10 years. And so even with the pandemic, I just would get up, and then I know what I need to do when my feet hit the floor. And so that saved me. Again, it saved me before having this writing habit, but it saved me again. But I also had deadlines, and I just needed to get it done. The way that it really affected me, outside of like the usual stuff around just feeling anxious and being in the doom scroll on Twitter, was that I couldn't read. And I read so much and have my whole life. It is my greatest pleasure. Like, I would give up everything, even writing. So if I, had to do that in order to be able to read, but I couldn't read anything except for horror. So this is the weird thing. All I've read is horror, and lots of it, and dark and scary. I think because it's so terrible what happens in these horror novels, like apocalyptic, terrible stuff. that it makes it feel like the rest of the world is not such a dumpster fire. And I'm still kind of in that place. I have not gotten my reading back, which I'm sure it will come back one day, but I just can't read anything emotional. I can't read anything heavy, just zombies and, you know, people getting infected by crazy zombie viruses. This seems to be a theme of books I've read. But yeah, I mean, I kept writing because I had to. And I have the habit of doing it. My writing's probably darker. I just turned in a book and my editor was like, you know, this could almost read just as a standalone thriller. And I was like, what? I don't know how to write a thriller. So she's like, I'll just layer in some softening bits. So I guess it has affected me to some degree, but I wrote a thriller, I guess. But it's not going to stay as a thriller. But yeah.
That's so funny, reading horror stories almost as if you're convincing yourself all the time that it could be worse. It could be zombies. It could be that horrible movie, World War Z, which almost killed me as well. A lot of things that almost killed me, apparently. Oh, the three of you are muted all of a sudden.
You were starting to break up, so I thought
that is so weird.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. So, Jenny, quickly, well, not quickly, I mean, not quickly you, but I'll pass it over to you quickly. You were saying you're behind on your 7th novel. Is that COVID?
Well, let's go with yes, but I'm also a really slow writer. I maybe do a book every other year. I need a lot of downtime in between books, and I was really clear when I switched publishing houses that I wouldn't be able to do it fast. And were they okay with me being on that pace? And everyone was cool. But you know, I was determined going into 2020. I'm like, I feel like I can start the next book, even though this next one isn't out yet. I'm good. And I was making progress January, February, and then March killed my productivity. I was stressed about everything. My kid was 5, and so he was home all day instead of being in kindergarten. And my husband, who also would go into the office, was now working from home, and it felt like he had a million meetings every single day. And so there he is in the next room talking very loudly. And I wasn't used to that in my space. My space has always been like, I have the house to myself, everyone's out, and I'm going to sit and I'm going to write. And now my place was chaotic. It was messy. I don't do well with mess. Things weren't where I last left it, because when you have a 5-year-old, things migrate to other places. And so I wasn't writing for a long time, but like Karma, I was very into things that scared me. I couldn't read the way that Karma was reading, but I got into like disaster movies and those made me feel better. So I rewatched all the shark movies that were like Jaws and The Meg, all these, and then I watched 2012 and The Day After Tomorrow, Twister, right? I wanted all the disasters because they made me feel like, okay, these people in the movie have survived a gigantic prehistoric shark. We will get through this pandemic, but the writing was not happening. And then when September came and the kids went back to school for a little bit, I tried really hard to write, and I'm still stressed. And then January happened, and I'm like, okay, now I need to ask for more time for the book, which I hate having to do, because there's a whole production schedule, as you guys know. And so when you're late with something, everyone gets messed up. But now I have to write the book. It's at a point where I can't wait for that perfect scenario, because it's not going to be anytime soon. So I'm at the dining room table. My kid is doing virtual first grade right beside me on the computer. And so I'm listening to the teacher trying to keep, a classroom virtual classroom of 6-year-olds still. A girlfriend of mine recommended an exercise ball. So he now sits on an exercise ball so he can bounce the whole time, which is horribly distracting, like in my peripheral vision, but he at least is in front of the computer the whole time, whereas before he would just wander, right? So I can now write a little bit, but it's very hard to get into the dark space that I like to be in when I'm thinking of, awful things. And then, so right now there's a strip club scene in my book, which I want to get right. And that's weird when your kid is 6 and he's sitting right beside you and they're reading about, the zoo. Right. So it's everything's changed, and it sucks.
It really does for everybody. But we're healthy, and I remind myself of that every day, you know. So it is what it is. The book will get finished some way. It always does.
True story. The book I'm writing right now for next year has a strip club scene. Weird. Is my audio still off?
But I'm not. Are you writing so is the strip club in pandemic times? No, because this is before.
No, it's post-pandemic. I set it post-pandemic.
So mine.
Yeah, the pandemic's done. I do mention it, but it's not in
2018 because I'm like, I can't. I don't know how to murder people when they're wearing masks. Well, maybe. But then people aren't going out, right? And so there's the victim pool has shrunk. So it's just easier to stop it in 2018.
I set mine in
not enough people to
like I'm avoiding 2020 entirely. So I would have said it in 2020, but I pushed it back a year for my modern day line because I was like, I am not even, you know, it used to be like, I don't want to be in a year that Trump was in. And now it's like, oh my God, I can't have a book in a pandemic because even though my characters are isolated in the Adirondacks, it's amazing the things that you have to consider. And like, I was supposed to go to the Adirondacks because I've been there, but I was a kid and I like to do my settings in places where I have been and I have like some experience of the place, like the little tiny nuggets you can get. But obviously I can't go. So, you know, I've been listening to a lot of just podcasts and trying to do my research that way, but it definitely complicates things. You know, when you're trying to write about a certain setting or in a certain time. So.
Natalie, your next one, is my audio still weird? If it is, I'm going to throw a question out and try and fix it. Is it okay again? Okay.
Strange. Now.
So the book you're writing now, Natalie, or your second one, is it historical fiction again?
It is. Jennifer will laugh because we have the same editor, and he's had it for, you know what he's like, right, Jennifer? So and he will read it. He will read it like this weekend, and he's to get back to me next week. So it's been sold actually on Synopsis. So it sold last summer. There hasn't been an official announcement yet, but it is basically takes the Jane Austen Society and moves forward 3 years into a London bookshop. Big surprise, set in a bookshop in 1950s London in Bloomsbury, and it follows the adventures of one of the 8 characters, the youngest and the most of the one that was the most flight risk, Evie, the servant girl. So it was wonderful because it was a milieu again that I was really familiar with, and I love books. I love stories about books. I love bookshops, and it's a battle of sexes between all the male department heads and the female staff, and you know. I think one of the things we were going to talk about was when you start to write, you know, what's the genesis of the book. And for me, it's always what's at stake. If I know what's at stake, I'll probably know time period and location. And then I just start to write, but I won't write until I know what everyone's fighting for. And I always have multi-character books. So my agent was like, you know, film and TV, 8 main characters. It's a bit much, you know, cut it down. And I gave him 9 this time. I was like, so there. So, but I love having, you know, this big canvas. And so for me, the next book is very much in the vein of the Jane Austen Society. And I had a blast. It was the book I wrote when I was happy. The Jane Austen Society was the book I wrote when I was sad, and I think it shows. I think it's a really fun and empowering read. So excited about it.
We don't have a pub date for that one yet.
Well, I'm told May 2022.
May 2022.
Yeah.
Okay. Fingers crossed. I'm glad my mic's still working. We're almost at 8 o'clock, and I do see we have some before we get to my questions. I want to make sure we get the audio ones. Hello, the audience ones. So I have a question from, I think you answered this one. When your new book comes out, Karma, it's next year, this time next year, is it?
No, it will be like late 2022.
Oh, okay.
Early 2023. We're still trying to decide. So I'll have a nice long runway for that one. But I have a rom-com, like I co-wrote
a holiday
rom-com with a good friend, and an author friend of mine. And I don't even know how it happened. We were joking one day about writing something together because writing can be so isolating. As Natalie said, you're in this like really weird silo. And so we had this moment where we were like, maybe we should just write something together. And then we were like, yes, let's do that. And then what makes people happy? Holiday rom-coms, holiday romance. So it just happened. And then it's out this year in October. So I don't know exactly how it happened, but it was a blast. You know?
And remind us of the name that you're writing, because you're not writing as Karma Brown and Marissa Stapley.
We're writing as Maggie Knox. And
Maggie Knox.
It's called The Holiday Swap, and it is out in October. So that's my like alter ego. And but my regular fiction, you know, I have just a little bit of time before that one is out.
Before the next one. You're so versatile. And we have a question here. Let me zip down. It was about book titles. I'm trying to find it now. Oh, this was from Paul and Gail. Do you choose the titles for your books? I don't.
I choose a working title, and then marketing and sales and editing, the publisher generally takes over. And sometimes Recipe is the only book title that I chose that has stuck. Everything else is
Jenny?
I'm terrible with titles. I'm also bad with character names. It's just not something I'm good at. But let's see, 6 books. So the 2 that didn't get changed when I submitted it were Creep, which was a title of a song that I was listening to by Radiohead at the time, and Jar of Hearts, which was the title of a song I was listening to all the time. So the 2 titles that they liked were titles that I stole from song people. And then the other 4 was just a lot of brainstorming and what did they think would work. And except for the Butcher, because I proposed Butcher and it went on for months and months, and they were like, we don't like Butcher, it's too aggressive. And then so after 6 months of going back and forth, they were like, oh, let's go with The Butcher. So
so different, changes everything.
So I don't get very much say. I think the contract says meaningful consultation, but in the end, right, it's their call what they want to do.
Yeah.
Natalie, did you come up with the Jane Austen Society or?
Yeah, when I sold to our editor Keith, a lot of the publishers that were interested were saying the title would remain open, and then Keith's like, no, I like it. That's the trick. That's what it's about, you know. And I was like, okay, great. And then with my next book, it's become this. Well, we'll announce when we agree on the title. The book wasn't written yet. So now he's reading the book, and I know he'll see why I picked the title I did when he read the book, but I'm going down with my ship. Like, I am holding on to that title. And like every few weeks, I like just let everyone know people like this title. I'm trying it out. Like, I'm doing everything I can to lay the groundwork, but I am prepared. And again, one of the alternative pitches from within the house, within the imprint, was just to add like one tiny little word, like with the Butcher. So, I mean, I know they know what they're doing, but I think one of my friends recently said it's like when you first see your book cover as well. She said it's like hearing the sound of your own voice. It's kind of jarring, and I think you do get, as a writer, very attached to the title.
Yeah. I don't get attached to titles
I don't either.
Oh,
me
not
neither.
even slightly.
I'm too new then.
I mean,
my lesson.
My second one, which ended up being called The Neighbours. My first one, so there was a logic. My first one, rom-com, was called Time After Time, which was originally, I'd called it No Time Like the Present, which they liked, but it got changed because it's quite long. And the second one, wait for it, I called it Now and Then, because there were chapters in the now and chapters in the then, possible, and time after time, now and then, you see the theme. But it's a rubbish title. And it's about an ex-boyfriend moving in next door. And we were brainstorming titles and trying to figure out what we were going to call this thing. And with my agent, she said, you need to brainstorm some titles. And my editor said, we're brainstorming in-house. And I just couldn't come up with anything because I'm rubbish at titles, harder than writing a book.
Yes, I agree. I'm terrible at titles too.
Awful.
Like, just a terrible part of the process.
Awful. And rumor has it, or legend has it, that some smart cookie during a marketing meeting said, well, what is this book about? Well, it's about people moving in next door. Well, why don't you just call it The Neighbors? And everyone went, oh, if only there was a word for people who live next door, you know. And that's how that one came about. But yeah, no, now I thought I had a great one for the one that comes out in May, which is called You Will Remember Me. I'd called it A Stranger Within, which I thought was great, and it really fits. It was a guy with amnesia and all that. And then 2 books came out called The Stranger Inside. So that was that one, done out the window. And I had this great title for the one that's coming out next year. And I thought, this is brilliant because it works on so many levels. And I sent it to my editor and she said, nah, that's way too generic. So I've given up. The next one, I'm just going to call it Book 7. And they can figure it out.
That's what you do. And then you wait. It's
It's interesting you said
that is generic. What was it? Can you say?
What was it? I called it Never Coming Home. But so I don't know, maybe it'll stick once she sees it. I don't know. But you mentioned, Natalie, when you see covers, having that, and we haven't really touched upon those at all. But when I get the draft proposal of a cover, I hover my mouse over the file, I close my eyes, and I double click, and I open my eyes. And that reaction that I have, that I know that is whether I like it or not. Yeah. So does that happen to you? What's it like when you see your cover for the first time?
Well, I only have the one. What happened with me was it's historical fiction, and there's a trend. As a bookstore owner, I know this. There's a trend to put a lot of backs of a woman on the cover, and bookstore owners will sometimes say, it's a little much, like it's very pervasive. And so I said to my agent, I had a right to consult, but no final approval. So I said to my agent, I know, like they're pretty, but I don't know why. I just don't want a back of someone on my cover. And I just remember that Keith sent it through and it just comes out. And I was like, there's 5 backs. And I almost had a heart attack. I was like, are they trying to just kill me? So my reaction was, a little extreme because it was the one thing I didn't want. But I love it. I love my cover. It's beautiful. And they knew what they were doing. And it's a gorgeous cover. But I had a bias as a bookshop owner that I saw so much of one thing. But it works for my book.
I think for me, I was averse to faces on covers, and it was becoming very trendy to have faces. And I don't like faces because I want to let the reader imagine what the character looks like. And a face can be very specific. And I got a face.
Yeah.
That's a great cover, though. It's a smashing cover.
It's better than the other face because the first face they sent me didn't look anything like the character and would have actually been kind of confusing. And then you get the reader emails going, your cover doesn't make sense. So this is a better face, but it's again, they're going to ultimately do what they think is best and what they think will work. And for titles, there's keywords that are trendy. Like girl was the thing for the longest time. And then woman, right? And in the end, I feel like they that's their job to know the marketing side of it. But we're still creative people and we want to put our stamp on our work. And the only title that I was really committed to was Jar of Hearts because I wanted to, the whole book was based on kind of the theme of that song. And I thought if they don't pick that title, I'm toast because then the book is it doesn't have that impact. But then once I did that, I had to quote the song and then I had to chase down the songwriter. And then that was awful too. So lesson learned, let them just name it whatever they want. Don't get attached.
Kalma, what's your experience with covers? You've had a number of different ones too.
So many different ones. And I have had a lot of the back of a woman. I think that's a very common cover for women's fiction, which is what I wrote sort of prior to Recipe. That was more the type of book I was writing. And so there always seemed to be a woman, with her back. Facing the reader. And I got to a point, I only pushed back on one cover because it really wasn't the right cover for the book. And it ended up that actually one of the retailers hated the cover. So they wanted to go with this cover. And I said, here's a very long email about all the reasons why this is a mistake. I did it, you know, in the nicest way that I could, but still being a little bit pushy. And they were like, no, we love it. We're keeping it. And so I thought, well, this is my cover. I will just accept this. And then they took it to one of the major retailers and they were like, we hate it. Changed immediately. And this is the other thing I didn't understand is how much influence the retailers have over a title, over the whole package. You know, I've had more than one book package changed because a retailer has been like, it will change how many we order for the stores.
Yes.
And that's huge, right? So this is why again, like what's inside the book is my job. And that's the part where my creativity comes out. And what's outside the book is influenced by a million different things like sales and other books and where it sits on the shelf and the colors. And that's not my job. And so I'm just going to focus on my job and let them do their job. Having said that, I love, love, love the covers for Recipe. All three of the covers well, there's been a few more, but the main markets, they've all been beautiful and perfect. And yeah, really happy this time. So it's always nice when it's a hit with you as well. But I think that, again, like that's their job. So.
Agreed. And I have another question for you, Karma. Completely different context or different subject. You are part of the 5 a.m. Writers Club. What time do you go to bed?
Okay, so it's 8:11. I am normally getting ready for bed now, and I'm asleep anywhere between 9 and 10. 10 is like the latest. And then I get up without an alarm. But, you know, my problem is if I go to bed at like 11, I had an event that started at 10 because it was out in Vancouver. And so I was, you know, like at 11 o'clock and we're all still talking. And I thought, oh, this is bad. And I didn't fall asleep until 3. And then I woke up at 5:30. So it's just, you know, I'm like a toddler, like with my sleep schedule. I'm just very now organized into that sleep pattern. So yeah, if you get up at 5, you have to go to bed early. That is the bottom line.
That's for sure. You can't do both, I would imagine.
No.
Now we have a writing question, an advice. What advice do you have for aspiring writers? And I'm going to add another one in here from Nisha, who asks, how do you smoothly transition between different points of view in your story? So who would like to, if we have one tip for aspiring writers, what would it be?
I try to break it up clearly. I learned this the hard way. When I was writing my first book, I opened the chapter describing a character that was sitting near the main character. And then it confused my entire workshop because they're like, are you writing about the homeless guy? Or are you writing about the person in the coffee shop? And I'm like, okay. So I went back to the drawing board. And so now when there's either like a page break or there's a new chapter, I stick with one point of view per scene. I don't head hop. I try not to. I don't think I do. But then I basically try to open each scene, letting the reader know exactly who is speaking to them in some way, either mentioning them by first name or, and then I just kind of carry on.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Writing advice? Any writing tips for aspiring authors? My biggest thing is try not to be precious about your work and about your words. I think that there is a difference between being precious and being thoughtful about what you're writing and how you're writing. But, the thing that you learn once you publish a book is that the book is not just yours. It now belongs to lots of different people. And even in fact, when a publishing house buys it and your editor's working on it, you now become a team, and it is ultimately your book and it has your name on it, but there are lots of people's influences through that story. And so if you're too precious about your words and you're unwilling to let other people read it in the early drafts to just get some feedbacks from friends or other writers, like if you really hold it too close to your chest, you can't make progress. And once the book leaves the publishing house and goes out into the world, it's everyone's book. And then everyone has thoughts about that. Some people love it. Some people are like, I don't know. There's all different opinions. But, if you just hang on and you're like, this is the only story I'm willing to tell. Like, if that's what you want to do, then that is what you're going to be. Hang on to it. Right. But I think if you have a goal of getting published, my advice is always to just get your words down. Don't be precious. Remember, everything can be changed.
just try to get that draft done and share your work.
Mm-hmm. Natalie?
I think I'm part of the 5 a.m. club. So for about, I guess, since the late 90s, I started getting up from 5 to 7 to write before I would go to work. And then when I was raising my daughter. And I think one piece of advice I would give to everyone is you can somewhat train your creative subconscious mind to kick in at certain times. And you don't know when the muse or the inspiration is going to strike necessarily. And some people feel you have to write every day. Stephen King does. He writes Christmas morning. He writes every day. For me, I don't write every day. I write when I'm really inspired by an idea, and I write quickly. And like Hannah, I think you and I both write our first drafts pretty quickly. And because while we're writing it, I'm in a vortex and I live in that world. But I've trained my creative subconscious mind to kick in at 5, whether I want it to or not. So even when I'm not writing, I get up at 5 and I get woken by my characters. My husband says, he's like, just get up and write. Like you can feel the energy. And I do think that what that means is that I always am kind of ready to at least try to write when I do get up, and my brain is ready, and I'm able to access a part of my brain that I can't later in the day when you get the bad email or the bad call with your mother or whatever. My mother's watching, so I just think that's for me, building the muscle and having it kick in at the same time every day was a really valuable, fortuitous result of, as a busy working mom, having to write so early in the morning.
I don't do the 5 a.m. I tried. I failed. I moved on.
It's not for everyone. You've got to find what works for you.
Yeah,
I think that's
right.
For all aspects. This is why writing advice is a hard question to answer, because it's different for everyone.
But that's actually really good advice. That it is different for everyone. That I had this image when I started on this journey that writers would get up in the morning or sit down in the evening or whenever to write, and they would sit in front of their keyboards and the words would just flow effortlessly, and it's not like that at all. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but very often I'm sitting here banging my head against the keyboard or the wall or something because it's not working. And sometimes it works. Sister Dear, I wrote really quickly. It just clicked. It worked. It didn't need heavy edits. And I thought, this is great. I've cracked it. I know what I'm doing now. Woohoo. And then I met book 5 and it kicked my backside. It was really, really hard to write. I was almost, and I don't cry easily, but I remember saying to Robert, it's not working. I was almost in tears because I was freaking out. The deadline's coming. It's not going to work and blah, blah, blah. And then it did. But one thing I did learn is that unless my bum is in my seat, right, no words going on the page. One way or another. And that's not to say that you can't spend valuable time walking around, outside, inside, baking, doing whatever it is, gardening, whatever it is that you do, and you're thinking about the story. I'm not taking away from that at all, because I do that a lot. My characters pop up, particularly when I'm washing my hair. I don't know why. But if you block the whole book out and you just think, no, I'm not, I can't, nothing's going to happen on the page. So you have to put your backside or in the chair or stand at a standing desk or whatever it is to be able to get words on the page. So another question we have, and we still had loads we haven't got to, but how much research, this is from Paul and Gail, how much research do you have to do when you're writing? And I think this might be the second to last question that we're able to take. We'll see. Who wants to take that one?
Well, as doing historical fiction a lot, that was I wouldn't say it was a surprising part. I love the research part. That's really fun. And that was one of my favorite things about being able to do a dual timeline, because the 50s was an interesting time to research. And so there's a lot of research that's involved. And usually I do a deep dive for a long time. And I read everything I get my hands on, and I listen to things, and I watch TV shows set in that time. And then I start realizing I'm in just the research spiral where it's just fun. And I'm learning about things I don't need to know about, like peanut butter and pickle sandwiches. I went on this 8-hour epic journey about peanut butter and pickle sandwiches, which were eaten in the 50s, and apparently some people still eat. And I thought I could fit it in. I was like, I will get this in Recipe for a Perfect Life. And I never did, because there was never a good spot for it. So now I know a lot about it, and maybe I'll find another place in another book. But, you know, it does. And there's research throughout, you know, it is a bit of a process. It was for me anyway.
Natalie, with historical fiction, you find the same?
Oh, I mean, yes, it's a lot of research with the Jane Austen Society. Like I explained earlier, I did a year of reading her or about her without any idea I was going to write a book. So when I finally sat down to write the book, I never looked at my research because I didn't have any, because I had just been reading it for fun. So what happened was, I think my characters really took front and center stage. And I think the research remained a bit like an angel on my shoulder, kind of like whispering behind me a little bit. And as I wrote, I sort of intuitively would remember things I'd read. Like I remember reading that Kelly Clarkson had bought Jane Austen's ring at auction at Sotheby's. And as I'm writing an auction scene, I'm thinking, oh, wait, I could make the acquirer a Hollywood movie star from the 40s because I know this.
Nice.
You know, so really the research kind of set the foundation for that book. With the next book, I did research for about a month beforehand, pretty intensively, on certain writers. There's some real life writers in the next book that make appearances. So I was doing research on their lives. And then from that, I would get information that I could use. And so then when I wrote the book, I would research during the day as I wrote. So I would start writing and I would hit my peanut butter and pickle sandwich moment. And then I would go on Wikipedia, and like an hour later, I'd go back to the sentence the person was saying in dialogue. But it worked. I mean, I think the book kind of determines in a way how much the research will be. I think, and I don't think there's a set way to do it.
Mm. Jennifer, we just research how to kill people, I suppose, do we?
Well, I mean, I think I did more at the beginning because my books had a lot more investigative stuff. And so I had to go down the rabbit hole of like, okay, if this wound happens, how long does it take for them to bleed out? Things like that. So I bought a homicide textbook from Amazon for like $100 back when I had no money, which has all these really awful crime scene photos in it with the breakdowns of what the investigation was. And it's an awful book. I still have it, but I have to hide it from Mox now because it's a bad book. But now that I've kind of like morphed a little bit more into like domestic suspense, psychological suspense, a lot of it is just drawn from like the suburban rage that we all feel, like living our normal lives, right? And all the dysfunction. And so I don't do a ton of research other than maybe just a fact check. So if I'm writing a scene set in the 90s, I want to make sure that I get, let's say, how big was the can of pop back in the 90s? Yeah. Is it as big as it is now, or was it smaller back then? So like little things, but then I also cheat a little bit too, because not that I recommend this, but I can say that I do a little bit, where you have your copy editor at the very end, and anything you miss, if you spell Kit Kat with lowercase k's, they will then note that it's Kit Kat with capital K's. And so I don't have to spend a lot of energy going down the rabbit hole of candy bars, because that would totally happen to me. And so I know that I can lean on the people that will have the book later and tell me if something is completely wrong. I don't recommend that when you're starting, but over time you can kind of
later on.
A little bit. Yeah.
Well, we only have a few more minutes left, so I'm going to circle back to Oakville with the last question before I hand it back to Jennifer. Has Oakville in any way, shape or form influenced and or featured in any of your books? Natalie says no.
I would like to say no, because my books are set in a fictional part of Seattle. I like my own Seattle world, but I write a lot about lifestyle. And if you live in Oakville, you can see a huge spectrum of lifestyles, and you can drive down Lakeshore and see these gigantic houses right on the water that are millions of dollars. And then there's Old Oakville, which is very historical and has been around for a long time with the big trees. And then there's my neighborhood, which is very kid-friendly and walking distance to schools and things like that. And I'm always aware of the differences in how people live, and I find it really interesting. And I think that plays a big role in my books. Not Oakville specifically, but what I see driving around Oakville.
Karma?
I was just trying to think if Oakville features, and it doesn't specifically as a town. My next book takes place in the woods. And so because I can't go to the woods where it takes place, I spent a lot of time walking through the woods behind my house and looking at the birds. And I had to write about a specific kind of hole in a tree. And that was important for part of the story. And I spent, hours walking through the woods, like trying to find a tree that looked like it had a hole that was the right size. And I would take my daughter and I'd be like, look for this tree. You need to help find this tree. So I have been spending time in the Oakville woods near my house looking for a very specific tree. So I guess that's research, and it's also Oakville based.
Local.
Yeah.
I don't feature, same as you, Jennifer. I don't have, Oakville doesn't feature, but it does impact. And I think with the neighbours, for example, there was the suburbia and whatnot. But there is a person in Oakville somewhere who features as a character in one of my books, a very, very, a paragraph. I was picking up one of the kids somewhere and I saw this young man on a skateboard, and he had black shorts with flames going up them and really, really curly, curly as my hair, red curly hair. And he had a fluorescent green plaster cast on his arm. And he just rolled past, and I thought, oh man, what a great character. So there is someone somewhere in Oakville who is in my book and has no idea that he was inspiration for the character. So if anyone out there had flame shorts about, I don't know, when would that have been? Maybe 2012? It could be you. That's, funny Oakville anecdote there. Well, thank you very much, ladies. This has been a real treat to see you all as we can't meet in person. Mm-hmm. And Jennifer, I'm going to hand it back to you.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. It was really very interesting, and I must admit my hold list at the library has gotten larger since we started this talk. So I want to thank Natalie, Hannah, Karma, and Jennifer for giving up your time and to talk to us about your writing. It was very, very interesting and informative. And just to remind everyone, if you're interested in reading any of these books, you can place holds at the library. We've got the titles, or you can alternatively buy them from a different drummer books right here in Burlington. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.